Can you hear me? Mike, they say they can in the back, can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Thank you. We appreciate you being here today, when a lot of people have taken off for sunnier climes, if that's possible, wherever. I think, first of all, Bert and I want to thank you all for being such loyal members of the class, and we've enjoyed doing it and hope that you've read some stories you enjoyed. We apologize again, although it's not any of our doing, that I know most of you would probably like more discussion. When people do discuss, you'd like to be able to hear everybody. It's just the nature of this particular beast, so thanks for bearing with us. I think you've probably heard all of the announcements. Wisdom Wednesday, Linda Hemmings will present Driving Safely, that's tomorrow. Do a course evaluations, Tuskegee Day Trip. I almost managed to get myself in an accident on South College today. It's just, and then this is something new that I would call your attention to. A complimentary pass in the spring 2019 catalog. Give one to a friend and encourage them to attend 2 weeks of class for up to 4 spring 2019 term classes for free. So call Shawnee at the center to Sunny Slope to make arrangements. So it's a coupon in the spring bulletin, which I think comes out March 25th. Get a friend to come for free for a couple weeks of classes. So Bert goes first today. You can see he's come with visual aids. At first I thought he was going to, he often puts a tie on. I didn't know what
Can't resist. Well, concerned that you have perhaps been bored with the staid, predictable stories so far. Margaret and I decided that we'd put wild and crazy on the plate for us today. I don't know whether you agree with that description or not, but we'll see if you do, and we'll see if maybe there are other descriptions you would like to add to the wild and crazy. Toward the end, we're going to try to pull at least one thread together of all the stories that we've looked at this term, and there are a lot of connections. I just happened to think about A Hook and Eye, the first story we read with our last class's stories. We've got first-person narrators. We could do some comparison and some contrast with that if we wanted to. I've said this to an individual class member, and I'll just say it to the whole class or quote something. That was a review of a poetry collection whose title was Joy, 100 Poems. It appeared about a year and a half ago. And the reviewer, in reviewing this particular collection of poems with the title Joy, made this statement: joy is not a prime theme of modern literature. And he, as a male reviewer, went on to say, modern literature tends to foreground irony, absence, lack, suffering, and protest. So if you're looking for joy, don't look for recent copyright dates. It will be found elsewhere. George Saunders has garnered a lot of praise, and I, for one, think it's deserved praise. He's been called a writer of arresting brilliance and originality, one of the most important and blazingly original writers of his generation, born in 58. any discussion of Saunders, a description of his work, will quite often bring in the idea of originality. One person uses the term inventive and imaginative, and then defines that as downright strange. But inventiveness, originality are commonplace in discussions and descriptions of Saunders and his work. Saunders' fiction, it's been said, often focuses on absurdity. Often it is it has a satirical tone, raises moral and philosophic questions, and frequently in it we will find a tragicomic element. Others will talk about, and this is the claim that was made, the stories are entirely real, no matter how zany the premise. Where the reality and the absurd come together is maybe where George Saunders lives the most. Huh?
I think it's such a pity he didn't learn about quotation marks.
He was educated as a geophysicist. So I don't know. Other descriptions of Saunders and his work. One reader finds what he calls grim, stimulating explosions of genius throughout his deeply thoughtful, endlessly entertaining flights of imagination. He's funny, he's off-kilter, but formally ingenious, while at the same time being unabashedly tender in what he writes about it. A lot of oxymoronic combinations here. Whether we find that, I'm not sure. Subversive, hilarious, emotionally piercing. He is, it's been said, a true original and a complete original. But this particular critic went on to talk about his partaking of other complete originals in American literature for their lyricism, playfulness, outrage, wit, and with regard to Mark Twain, common sense and exasperation. His voice is audacious, but also entertaining. He is the master, it's been said, of the surrealistic satirical story. And we have a sample of that with our selection, I think, in a great deal of his great deal of his work. The Red Bow was included in the annual collection of the year's best fantasy and horror fiction. And it actually, though it didn't win, was a finalist for the Bram Stoker Award, which is given for superior achievement in dark fantasy and horror writing. There are a couple of labels for you. This is a horror story. It is a story of dark fantasy. We may want to use the category of parable or fable. Some have used allegory with this story specifically, as well as other of his work. I think the term I would like best of all is cautionary tale. Would put it very firmly in this category, but it does certainly have elements of the parable in it. We can extend what happens here to other situations. We can come up with some of these for ourselves, and other readers have come up with others. But in any number of instances that involve mob hysteria, mob mentality, mass paranoia, etc. And unfortunately, we have examples of that mounting, I think, although they've always been present. Inevitably, I think we have our attention called to the voice in this story, just as we did with Earl. we do have, I think, a very clear speaking voice and a good bit of evidence with which to form some opinions about Ed, who is our narrator, and who I would claim is probably not the sharpest pencil in the pencil cup. Good many reminders of Earl in some ways, I think. Let's begin, if you will, with talking a little bit about Uncle Matt. Uncle Matt has been given an opportunity with literally a red bow on it. He's gotten a gift, and he seizes the opportunity. Ed talks about what he was before and what he has become when this tragic opportunity presents itself to him. We have an amazing transformation of Uncle Matt, whose really fine day, you'll remember, consisted of getting the mail and messing with the TV antenna a couple of times. Now he's found a spotlight. He's made a spotlight for himself. Where is unemployed Uncle Matt coming from, and where is he going? He's coming from nothing to big figure on the stage. Anything to explain this? Ed's a little taken aback at all that Matt does. He really hadn't spent much time with the children. But this opportunity presents itself, and he seizes on it. Becomes almost a leader of this cult. Anything in the story that might explain where Matt is coming from? Uncle Matt is coming from for this transformation from passive do-nothing to active leader. Anything in the story?
I think his lack of success. As a teenager, he had some sort of scuffle with the priest who comes into the story later and apparently lost. So he has a long history of being a loser. And he's lost his job inexplicably. We don't know how that happens. And seems to be living off of his nephew's employment.
I think the priest is clear because he is seeking some vengeance there, and he gets it early. Father Terry had taken his girlfriend away from him. Apparently, he'd come out on top of an attraction and makes Matt a loser. So here's opportunity for vengeance. He took away something from me that I loved, or thought I did, and now I can get him. I'm able to turn the tables here. I'm going to, and once again, the name is not fortuitously, is not accidentally chosen. Going to kill Martin, and he does. He gets Martin out of the picture. Well, where's he going with all this? He does. he
right down to the uniform with the T-shirts. It's like a rally. It's like one of those horrible, despotic rallies.
And he doesn't worry about some moral boundaries. What he's selling, he will sell almost any way he can. For example, Ed recognizes that he holds up the bow, which becomes a symbol of what has happened, but it's not really that bow. He's got another one, and when he puts it on a poster, he has to work with the colorization because it was a red bow, not a pink bow. But that doesn't matter to Uncle Matt, but he becomes very skillful at getting people on board and doing things that they might have questions about otherwise. It's a story about people feeling pressure to go along, feeling pressure not to resist what's going on, and it's not. I would contend, black and white. I mean, there has been a death, and if we can prevent future deaths, we need to do something about that. But where is that line? Uncle Matt doesn't worry about that line very much at all. How about Ed, the narrator? What kind of person do we find Ed? What motivates him? He's a bereaved father, is that right? Once again, our story starts with a pronoun for which we don't have an antecedent. Next night, walking out where it happened, we don't, in the next paragraph, the it refers to the little red bow. So we've left the first it behind. And it never really is, I don't think, very precisely defined. But we all ultimately come to reckon that it happening is the killing of Emily by what appears to be a group, not a very large group, but a small pack of dogs. This is the terrible tragedy that's at the center of everything. And Ed is her father. What kind of person is Ed? I've already characterized him as being not real sharp, but he is suffering from a deep trauma, I think. His wife is never named.
Well, I was just going to say, he wants to do something to make his wife feel better because she won't come out of the bed.
And she's the one who's going to extend this. Where does rationality begin to fade over into irrationality? Moral action for the concern of others fade over into immoral action. And she's the one who extends that. Not just dogs, but cats is first. And finally, not just dogs and cats. Kill every mouse. Kill every bird. Kill every fish. Anyone objects, kill them too. So the animals that are referred to ultimately, perhaps, going to move over into the human species. This is an aggrieved mother, and she deals with the situation very differently than Ed does, who's a male and maybe is expected to go out. Can't see you. Yes.
But it also say that she was not in her right mind.
Right. Yeah. Yes. Yes. She's in her room. Yes. Ed says this. This is our source of information here. Query: Who are Jason and Seth in this story? Jason and Seth, and we could add Katie too. Just looking at the names of some people who are sensitive. Seth is referred to as Jason it is referred to as my Jason. And Karen is called our Karen. And I'm assuming these are other children. They're involved very early in the action of going out, trying to remedy it. and not letting it occur, again. This outrage, terrible outrage is taking place. We want to prevent other outrages, and in that process, we are creating perhaps an even more terrible outrage. That's a nice term, I think. One of Faulkner's favorite too, outrage here, but it is here. Formally adventurous, F-O-R-M-A-L-L-Y, formally, technically adventurous with the way he does his stories, is one description of Saunders that I mentioned. And this story fits that description, I think some. John, you asked about quotation marks. Saunders evidently knew about and frequently uses the dash in this story. Anybody remember any particular reaction as you read the dashes or as you thought back over the story? What is the effect of this repetitious use of dashes here?
Sometimes the dash comes in when it fills the space for something that they don't want to mention. The father, particularly, the rector, Father Terry, sort of trails off rather than mentioning the death of the daughter. That's one place that I noticed it gets.
It's consistent with Ed, though. Yeah, it's consistent with Ed. He will stop right at the bottom of the first page of the story in our text on 669. But that Miss Pearson, who'd seen the whole, well, she said there'd been four dogs, and the next night we found so forth. He's going to stop and back up. He's a little uncertain at times. He's not our strong, authoritative narrator. Go back through. We won't take time to look at all of the examples of it here, but there are a lot of them. I'm just looking right in the middle of 671 right now. But losing her head, I suppose, made him realize for the first time how much he loved her, and this sudden strength, focus, uncertainty, whatever. He's going to stop his train of thought in the syntax of a sentence and back up. And he does this repeatedly. It becomes a mark of Ed's, the way Ed thinks. Sometimes Ellen mentioned this last time. He will back up and say what I said. For example, then Uncle Matt held up the bow. Actually, it's a new bow. Not the old bow. Actually, it's a new bow. Really, I don't know where he found it. And sometimes he will back up and say, this happened, and then when he gets on the other side of that dash, he says, well, it seemed to have happened that way. But this is a verbal picturing of Ed's character here. He's not strong and assertive. And I think we react to him this way. Part of this larger.
Well, I think another thing is he doesn't want to say exactly what happened. And I thought that at the bottom of 669 and on 670 about, say, Oscar de Barnhouse, we found some other animal would,
Yeah.
it's like he doesn't want to say.
Right, yeah. Our plan being, Dr. Vincent had said this was best. He's trying to build up, but he's not asserting our plan was and it's right. He's back and forth. And so sometimes he will talk to us, and yet, do you see what I mean? He's moving. This is part of a larger narrative technique, Ed will have us at a particular place telling what happened and focused on the night of the rally, or whatever we want to call it. And then he'll drop away from that. He'll just leave us suspended, and we'll have sometimes 2 very long, full paragraphs when he's reflecting or just talking, and then we'll go back to that night. He does this at the conclusion as well. The last 2 pages, we have this going on considerably. The language that he uses himself gets to be demagogic. He begins to employ the language himself, which he was not employing at the beginning. This has some very close echoes in my mind for contemporary political rhetoric. 2 examples on the last two pages. The bottom, second to the last full paragraph on page 679. That very beautiful number. And I hear immense echoes of that from contemporary political rhetoric and some fearmongers who are on the political stage today. It's not just beautiful, it's very beautiful. It's not just excellent, it's very excellent. This sort of intensification to sell something, to get something, get something across. And then the descriptive tag at the end of the first paragraph ending on page 680. Just very unhappy people. Not just unhappy people, but very unhappy people. Description of people, and then with the tag, scum of the earth, or whatever. We're picking up demagogic language, people who are working other people into a frenzy. And people, for whatever reasons, find it very hard to resist this. I think Saunders makes it fairly complicated. Apparently, a little girl has been killed. We have pretty good indication of the source of this, but we start expanding that source. We need to keep the rapists and the murderers out, so let's do something along the border. This is the answer to that, if we believe. But it's very hard, and repeated several times here, the people feel compelled to say, I'm sorry for your loss. I'm sorry for your loss. There has been a loss here. But again, they're not able to draw the lines that I think as readers, we're outside of this. The lines that we think we can draw, to say, well, we have pretty good evidence that the dogs did it. So let's concentrate on dogs. And somebody says, well, Raph, too bad you weren't there. Cats may be involved here too. All the animals are sick. They get teary-eyed and they have trouble standing up. Cats probably are not threats that dogs are to human life. But let's move to the cats, and then we'll go to all the animals, because that parakeet may have it and give it to the dog. So,
Yeah, I was going to say, and even the cats who are kept indoors by their owners.
right,
We have to give those. I mean,
right. Part of this narrative technique toward the last two.
Mary Ann has a...
Well, I was just going to go back. Your contrast between that and the narrator on 675, Father Terry tries to say, this is about 2/3 of the way down, I'm not saying Merton's trouble is, I'm not comparing Merton's trouble here. Uncle Matt says, let's hope not. It gives him a position of authority that he's going to exercise throughout the story, like when he makes up these flyers. And,
Matt, yeah.
This is an opportunity, as you said. This
Right.
a tragic opportunity.
You see Uncle Matt here replying to Uncle Terry. He says, you know, about Merton. This is at the bottom of 671. If I can ever turn the page here. Everything is fine. Merton is fine, and then Matt says could be fine, but also could be he's sick. He does this several times. Might be, could be. He's ready. He's ready for it.
I was interested in the dog's name, Merton.
Yeah.
The other dogs have sweet dog names like Cookie and Sadie.
Tweedledee.
Yeah, but this dog is named Merton, and that stuck out to me. So I Googled
Anybody? Thomas Merton, probably.
Yeah, but there's also something, I'm going to read this, this is why my phone was on, I'm sorry.
Okay.
It's called Merton strain theory. Okay, in sociology and criminology, the strain theory states that social structures within society may pressure citizens to commit crimes.
Right on it. That might very well have
That's
been.
a very deliberate choice.
Yeah,
of names for that dog.
It does clearly stands out. I just associated, since it was the priest dog, with Thomas Merton, who actively took part in protest and so forth. Yeah, but yeah, very good. We'll add that. One other thing, quite quickly, in talking about this narrative technique, where Ed will have us at a certain point in the dramatic action, and then he'll back away from it and go elsewhere in his own mind or explanations. But on the next to last page of the story in our text, again, we're at this rally where Uncle Matt has gotten these people together and puts on a show and riles them up and put on the T-shirts that he's made, etc. But we do know what happens beyond this. We are told about how it's going to expand before we return to that night. This is on page 679. We have Ed kind of talking to himself. What I'm saying is animal murdered child. And then the last paragraph, last full paragraph on page 679, which is why we eventually did have to enact. So we're told what's going to happen here. We don't stop at the rally. We did have to enact our policy of sacrificing all dogs and cats who had been in the vicinity. We've got spatial expansion too. They don't have to be in the village, in the vicinity. And somebody's going to have to be defining vicinity, just as Uncle Matt has said. Well, you know, we'll have to get somebody to define what some of these things mean. Apparently infected, etc. But as far as killing the mice, the birds, the fish, no, we had no evidence to support that. Not at that time, anyway. But we're going on. Something prescient about what she'd said, because in time we did have to enact some very specific rules regarding the physical process of extracting the dogs and or cats, or the fish, birds, whatever, and also had to assign specific penalties should these people assault one of the animal removal officers, all caps. We've already come up with a quick 3-point plan here, all caps, here. And a few of them did resist, and finally also had to issue some guidelines on how to handle individuals who, for whatever reason, felt it useful to undercut our efforts by, obsessively and publicly criticizing the 5 and 6 point plans. Just very unhappy people. And then, but all of that was still months away. So he's carried us into the future, and he's going to carry us back. How deluded is Ed here in this final paragraph, you think? He's trying to prevent similar future profound, unimaginable tragedies. And this is Uncle Matt's term here. Uncle Matt has risen to the occasion. As I looked out over the crowd at all those T-shirts, I don't know, I found it deeply moving that all of these good people would feel so fondly toward her, many of whom had not even known her. And it seemed to me that somehow, they had come to understand how good she had been, how precious, and were trying with their applause to honor her. Is he deluded here? It's his daughter we're talking about. Are they honoring the memory of Emily with what they're doing? Yeah.
He needs to think they are.
He needs to.
And if the most cynical viewpoint you can put on this public relations viewpoint is if you want to drive home a point, get some grieving parents on camera. They will immediately win the hearts of the people who are watching whatever you broadcast. And that's essentially what's happening here.
Yes. 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 Get some grieving parents on camera, whether they're in the congressional quarters or wherever they are. Get some grieving parents. Pull at your heartstrings, and so you're willing to take. You just get caught up. Here's the hysteria, and you don't want to be seen as not doing this. It's not the right thing to do. You're supposed to feel some compassion, and you just keep going until you are participating in what comes about here. One final thing is that, Carolyn, I can't see. Judy.
It was like the death of the child was lost. That became secondary. It was just stirring up the crowd and getting the daughters. And Ed seemed to me to be very passive, just a bystander. This was his child, but yet other people made, Uncle Matt and all these other people made all these, the doctor, Uncle Matt made all these decisions.
It goes along.
Got caught up in
Yeah, and this is one of his right. He has to believe this, that they're honoring her. So he's caught up in it too. One description, and I'm over time already. One description here is, and the term the commentator used was allegory. That this is an allegory of some United States invasions of countries in the Middle East. We had harm done to us, so we go out and restore everything. Certainly it can be extended to many cases where the public gets pulled in and manipulated, I think. Okay, my time's up. Let's take a break.
Are we all back? Dennis Johnson was a much admired writer of his generation. I think that it probably is not too much of an exaggeration to say that he lived much of the life, its essence anyway, that we get in this story. And he died of liver cancer in 2017, which led to a proliferation of obituaries in a lot of the places I guess a writer would like to be remembered, like the New York Times, the New Yorker, and so forth. And people spoke of, like Tobias Wolff, who we read last time we taught this course. There's a story in here I recommend. But Tobias Wolff called him one of the most distinctive voices in our literature. I think he wrote about 5 novels. He started out as a poet. The volume from which this story is taken, which was called Jesus' Son, was made into a movie. I think it was 1992, and one of the actors was Dennis Hopper. And I don't know much about film stars, but I do know Dennis Hopper, and I would pick him for the movie. I don't know what role he played. The narrator here is Fuckhead, and I think this may be the only story in the volume of stories that he's specifically named. And of course, we've been talking about narrators. If ever there was an unreliable narrator, it may be Fuckhead, although he may have the wisdom of the insane, I don't know. But anyway, Johnson, before I go any further, I want to talk about what he was, one of the things he was admired for was his minimalism. And most of you have read Hemingway, and I think that in our time, his collection of interrelated short stories is one of the great books of modernism. But you know that direct style in which you don't have any unnecessary words. And you might just look at the first page here of 383 of Johnson and notice how few adverbs there are. Try to count the adverbs, the adjectives. They're just not there for the most part. Unless they're just purely like about 3 weeks. This was in 1973 before the summer ended, with nothing to do on the overnight shift but batch the insurance reports from the daytime shifts. He's a clerk in the hospital. I just started wandering around over to the coronary care unit, down to the cafeteria, etc., looking for Georgie, the orderly, a pretty good friend of mine. He often stole pills from the cabinets. So you can go on and on throughout the story, and it's like this. If there's an adjective or adverb, it's very purposeful. He doesn't need to tell us how to think. We hear these voices. You go back to the first story. In most of the stories we've read, there's all kinds of backstory. We know something about these people's histories. We get most of their inner thoughts and, you know, that kind of thing. We don't have that for the most part here. It's just this minimalist writing, which can be kind of funny if you like horror, funny, and dialogue. Talk about the use of dialogue. Let's see. Yes. I'll find it later and we'll get back to it. But it's just listen to people talk, getting rid of the adjectives. But there's also great, I don't want to say eloquence, but really good use of language to get at the feeling of what's going on here. And very quickly, the loaded lines, I guess you would say, and an occasional image. The doctor comes in, I mean, this is funny, but it's not funny. The doctor comes into the room and says, "What's the trouble? You got a guy, you know, with a knife in his head." The nurse says, "It's just one of those things." When they're out running around, "We couldn't find the road back to town." You know, literal statement, but loaded with metaphoric meaning here. And this one I particularly liked. "The road we were lost on cut straight through the middle of the world." You know, it's. I like the bull elk, giving off an air of authority and stupidity. Any other bull elks that we might know in our culture come to mind, you know. And this is a 1992 story. Boy, let's see, this is 393. I don't remember who's the speaker here. Again, it's a loaded question this time, statement. Oh, it's Terence. Georgie asked Terence Weber, who's come out of it and shaking his hand, who are you supposed to be? You know, who is anybody supposed to be? And then the hitchhiker they pick up who's been doing bees, they sting, but he says it's all part of the harmony. Well, of course, these are drugged out people, but they're delivering these loaded lines that could lead into the heart of the trouble of what's going on in this story. So anyway, I wanted to talk about the style. Oh, here's one. 391. The big rigs were going down the highway like shutters down a long hacksaw blade. Like shutters down a long hacksaw blade. This is mean territory we're in here, folks, psychologically and other ways. So minimal style, not devoid of imagery, but the piercing lines that get to simple lines, everyday conversation that kind of, in a way, sum up what's troubling us, or troubling the people in this story. So back to larger things. If you want to come back to that later, we can. Emergency is taken from a larger volume called Jesus' Son, and that title itself, led by Charlotte's astute research into Merton here, it's amazing. You get started on these stories and the things you find that are relevant. The title comes from a song by the Velvet Underground and Lou Reed, 1967. Does that ring bells for anybody? My music, this is my generation. I was my first year of graduate school, but my musical education, pop culture, is very limited. But anyway, the Velvet Underground I had heard of before, and Lou Reed. And it's the title of Jesus' Son comes from a song called Heroin. Of course, these are all available, the lyrics and actual performances on YouTube. So, when I put a spike into my vein and I tell you things aren't quite the same, when I'm rushing on my own and I feel just like Jesus' Son, and I guess that I just don't know. So, a drug culture song. And so the stories in Jesus' Son, there's 11 interrelated stories, of which the narrator, with that lovely name, is the center. And so, there's no 12th story. But anyway, somebody has compared, Johnson called himself a religious writer, he was Catholic. Some people have compared these stories of this drug culture, alcoholism, to the Stations of the Cross. And each of the stories, another stage, but you never get to the 12th stage, which I guess would be the resurrection, or what is the 12th stage of the...
Well, I think there are 14 now. Let's ask Nelson.
Yeah, anyway, this writer said that there should have been a 12th, and there's... Anyway, so these people really are into destruction, searching perhaps, who are you, what am I, that kind of thing. Well, what is the emergency? What is the emergency? Well, there goes my thing. I'll get it. I'll become expert at this. Okay, I'm back online. Okay. What's the emergency? Pardon? The knife in the eye. Okay. Certainly. Anything else? Is it a loaded title, multidimensional?
The in-depth staff at that hospital.
The hospital, okay. Yeah. And you know, this reminded me, maybe it did you, of the story of the girl who's left her sock on the floor in the hospital. And if you remember, Dwight said he thought it was comic, the whole thing. Well, I don't think Francie's comic, but I suppose you could see that story as absurdist. A young woman trying to find her way in the world, and you've got the hospital and all of its mistakes, you know, the headmistress of her school, the crazy lady on the bus, but there's the hospital who doesn't bother to notify her, etc., and all of that. And so you have this hospital. Tell us a little bit about the hospital. Okay.
I always look at these short, I love the traditional scientific or, being scary or whatever, because I loved Twilight Zone, Outer Limits, and I can just see this as an Outer
Okay.
Limits.
Which doctor do they call? They call the experts, but what do they get?
Oh,
And more than a generalist, he is the family service doctor. And he thinks the nurse has called him to embarrass him. It's the thing he's least prepared to do. We're not even given their names. It's just the nurse, sort of a stereotype. And she's preoccupied with eating. Dixie cup, yeah. The doctor does say that person is not right, not at all, not one bit, the doctor said. As long as my instructions are audible to him, it doesn't concern me. Nurse insisted upon spooning stuff up out of a little Dixie cup. I've got my own life and the protection of my family to think of. So she's not at all concerned. The doctor's incompetent. And the hilarious thing is that Georgie just pulls it out. And it reminded me of something I think I heard on TV, maybe it was a comic skit or something, that sometimes the statistics were you were better off not going to the hospital than going. Your survival rate was, I don't know, but anyway.
Reality in some of this.
You recognize that, Jan?
Yes, I've been to many hospitals.
Jan? Yeah.
Well, the statistics show that when they had the doctors in California go out on strike several years ago, the mortality rate went down.
Well, maybe that's what I heard. When the doctors in California went out on strike, the mortality rate went down. Yeah. So, anyway. And again here you have Georgie is singing a song, which I actually looked up. Hello, cowgirl in the sand, is this place at your command? Kind of a romantic song. Hello, cowgirl in the sand, is this place at your command? Can I stay here for a while? Can I see your sweet, sweet smile? Georgie's obviously off on a different planet, and yet he is the orderly, and maybe he is given a name, but these people that are supposed to take care of us, orderly, nurse, doctor, go figure, they're not there to help us, okay? So the emergency is this whole hospital. And again, you can probably expand, why are these people on drugs? Well, another emergency, go to the third sentence of your story. What does it begin? Or ends, actually, if it's a short sentence. Statement of fact, and I think we're supposed to read a whole lot of backstory into that sentence. This was 1973. What's the backstory here? Vietnam. January that year, Nixon signs the Paris Peace Accords, but the war goes on for another 2 years. And of course, the military comes back in at the end, doesn't it? When they pick up Hardy, who wants, his numbers come up, and Georgie assures him he'll get him to Canada or he'll find a way. So I would think, that's the larger cultural emergency that's going on here. And why are these guys on drugs? We really don't know. But I think about all the other stories we've read this semester term, and the kind of culture we have there. I mean, is it a society that anybody would want to enter in most of those stories? Violence, the painful gender division. Do we have any healthy families? And here I'm extrapolating, we're not, the war is what we're told. I mean, it implied that that's the problem. And we've all lived through that generation, and we knew people like that, or who they were. Rebellion against the war, being sent off to fight a war that nobody much believed in. But also the larger middle-class culture, a lot of people saw as meaningless. And we have seen that mostly through the window of marital conflict or disassociation, but so that is perhaps in the background also. It certainly was, for Francie, it was just a larger, the whole culture was just a little bit crazy. So anyway, emergency, the knife in the head, the whole hospital is an allegory, symbol of what's supposed to be looking after us, and then I think the war. Yes, Gabby. Okay. Gabby raised, they go out on this could be in Iowa, I don't know, Johnson was in the writer's, I don't think he's in the writer's workshop, he taught at the writer's workshop in Iowa City, which is surrounded by rolling countryside. So the journey could be out into a Iowa countryside, someplace like that. So, Gabby, what did you make of the rabbits? What are they doing in there? These guys are high, by the way, of course. Anybody? What are the rabbits doing in there? Wendy?
Reminded me of Steinbeck's The Red Pony. No, mine's the rabbit.
Okay, explain. I'm not familiar with that.
Well, wasn't it George? Yeah. The same, the big guy? And he was there. Yeah. Yeah. There was that feeling of almost like maternalistic wanting to save everything.
Okay.
And so I think George has, he likes to save things. He does have that soft side to him.
Okay. But prior to wanting to save the rabbits, what has happened? The babies. He wants to save the baby rabbits. He hits the mother in his drunken state, slashes it open. This family's going by. The kids are fascinated, the baby rabbit. I mean, it's so macabre, but it's really funny. Okay, so Georgie wants to save them. Anything else we can do with those? And of course, the narrator, fuckhead, slips, crushes them, and so. Anything? Yeah, Bill.
Wasn't there a saying in Vietnam, we destroyed the village in order to save it?
We destroyed the village in order to save it. Okay. We killed the mother, but we saved the babies. Yeah.
And then we killed the babies.
Yeah. So the rabbits, I think, relate the murder of the rabbits, Georgie's effort to save it. It picks up on the war image, the blood. And of course, what's Georgie doing when we first get into the story? Mopping up blood. He says, there's blood everywhere, And it's, okay. So, and we're talking about Johnson's style. And Bert and I both have talked about breaks. You notice all the breaks here where and of course these people are not in a coherent state anyway, but you can jump from one episode to another scene. It's sort of disjunctive, but it's not. These things are all made to tie together. Anything more on the rabbits anyone wants to say? Well, what about the angels? This again is, who are the angels that they stumble upon? It's on 390. We bumped softly down a hill toward an open field that seemed to be a military graveyard. So again, if you missed the war, he's got the war in here in various ways, filled with rows and rows of austere, identical markers over soldiers' graves. I'd never before come across this cemetery. On the farther side of the field, just beyond the curtains of snow, the sky was torn away, and the angels were descending out of a brilliant blue summer, their huge faces streaked with light and full of pity. The sight of them cut through my heart and down the knuckles of my spine, and if there had been anything in my bowels, I would have messed my pants from fear. Georgie opened his arms and cried out, "It's the drive-in, man!" They're showing movies in a fucking blizzard, Georgie screamed. I see, I thought it was something else I said. So, I don't know, we don't need to explicate this, do we? But they're stoned, they make the mistake, but you have this military deaths, angels, pop culture all laid on top of one another. What does it all lead to? Senselessness, humor, the lack of a stable moral center anywhere in this. And on the next page, at the end of that first long paragraph, he talks about the cinematic summer ended, the snow went dark, there was nothing but my breath. The cinematic summer. Can you, yeah, Jan?
Just had a flashback on some of that with those rabbits.
Mm-hmm.
Could that have also been an allegory for the Charlie Manson group?
Could have been.
Because, you know, there was a pregnant woman there.
Yeah. Yeah. Charlie Manson murders, Sharon Tate, right? Yeah. Yeah. Babies slaughtered in Vietnam, killings in this country. Yeah, Bill.
Well, the names were kind of like Jacob's Ladder in the book of Genesis, but isn't there also a movie called Jacob's Ladder about a Vietnam vet who's got PTSD and can't deal with his life?
Could be. I don't know the movie. Could very well. Jacob's Ladder is a Vietnam movie. Anybody familiar with that? Bill's recalling. So, yeah. Like in our culture, the vision of the divine, if you will, of spiritual meaning comes to us through the films. You know, we have a couple of allusions to that here. The mistaking the outdoor cinema for angels. It's just a movie. Cinematic summer ends in winter. It's covered over with snow. A world of delusions, fakery. Here's one that I liked. Let's see. On page 394, as we zoom toward the end, they've picked up Hardy, who wants to get to Canada. He's been drafted. It brings us, opened with, talk about endings and beginnings need to coincide or somehow speak to each other. And so he begins with 1973 in the third short sentence, and he ends with the young man wanting to avoid the draft. Or he's been drafted, he's AWOL, I guess. But anyway, in the middle of the page, we've had the bee stings, and Hardy says it's all part of the same harmony. Outside, the same identical stretch of ground repeatedly rolled past our faces. And again, everything's the same. It's like a movie rolling reel over and over, whatever. The day was cloudless, blinding. But, Georgie said, look at that, pointing straight ahead of us. One star was so hot it showed bright and blue in the empty sky. Well, what is that star? The sun, isn't it? Looking at the sun and empty sky. I said that Johnson is a religious writer, but I think here you have him looking at his doubts and the trouble of discerning where God may be in this world. But it's an empty sky, at least as these guys see it. They don't get beyond that. And then we get to the end, kind of reminiscent. This has been a recollection. Remember, this guy says, looking back, it was 1973. That world, these days, it's all been erased, and they've rolled it up like a scroll and put it away somewhere. Yes, I can touch it with my fingers, but where is it? After a while, Hardy asked Georgie, I guess we're back to the present, what do you do for a job? And Georgie said, I save lives. So we asked about what an emergency might be. What does it mean? What do you think Georgie means here? How should we read this when Georgie says, I save lives?
Well, he saved the rabbits, babies, and now he's trying to save the guy who's on his way to Canada.
Okay, well, what happened to the babies? The babies died, but he saved somebody else's life, maybe.
The guy with the knife.
He did save the guy with the knife in his face. Okay. That's 50%, 50-50? Gabby?
He's going to save Harvey's life because he's going to get him to Canada.
You think he can get him to Canada? They can't even find the way back into town.
They're in Idaho.
What?
I'm thinking they're in Idaho.
Well, if they're not, okay. Okay. Could be. I mean, this is unspecified. Yeah. Anybody else want to talk? Think.
Qualifies it. He says, don't worry, sir. He said, we'll get you there. How? Somehow. I think I know some people. Don't worry. You're on your way to Canada. Qualifies it with 3.
Yeah. Somehow. Yeah. So not necessarily a positive ending. But Georgie is the orderly and mopping up the blood.
Well, he was the guy that pulled the knife out.
Yeah, he pulled the knife out.
And it worked.
It worked.
Hapless, but effective.
Is that the best we can hope for? That some hapless guy may do the right thing in his drug-riddled moment? Anybody else? Anything on the story or in a,
Well, yeah, one comment. If anyone wants to see the author, he had a cameo part in the movie. He was the man with the knife in his eye.
Okay, then Jesus, you've seen the movie. Okay. Anybody else seen the movie?
A lot.
Okay. Yeah, Bill, you've seen the.
In the book of Revelations, there's a bunch of scrolls that get rolled up. The end of times.
Okay, Bill says in the book of Revelations, there's a scroll that gets rolled up
Number of scrolls, yeah.
at the end of time. Okay. So again, we're dealing with a religious writer who, if you're more if you know your Bible and so forth, you may pick up a lot more than I did. Book of Revelation, Jacob's ladder, angels descending. Well, let's talk about endings. All of us. Bert's going to join the conversation now. Endings that you remember, that you liked, that you thought were successful. Thinking back, that we've read this term. And partly I'm talking about modern contemporary stories. This one ends on sort of dark, ironic humor, perhaps. Is this true of all the stories we've read? Any happy endings? Yeah, Ralph?
The thing that I thought was true of pretty much all of them is they're almost like a memoir. They're a slice in the middle of something. Something happened before this, and something happens after. You have to sort of decide what it was that happened before, and then project what you think might happen, like baboons, you know.
Okay.
What's going to happen after that?
By the way, if you like baboons and the animal metaphors for a marriage or a relationship, it's Sheila Kohler. Has one, what's the title? It's about, it uses an experimental animal.
Sheila Kohler's Baboons. What's the name of that one? We'll find it toward the end.
It's, no, Sheila, that's,
Sheila Kohler's Baboon lady.
there's another. Oh, it's Leslie and Sam by Douglas Unger. And I remember Bert and I both liked that story, but we thought maybe it was pushing the animal-human equation a little heavily, but it's another one. This one's about a woman who works in a lab where they use animals for experiments. And they're about to do away with her favorite chimpanzee or whatever. Yeah. So, the failure, do we ever really feel concluded at the end of any of these stories, that things have been tied up with a bow?
I think I've referred to this before. I had a short but long-lasting, in effect, conversation with some filmmakers who convinced me about a lot of things. But I'll never forget his description of a story, filming a story. He said, it's very simple. He said, you have a monkey, you get that monkey up a tree, you throw rocks at him, and you get him down out of the tree. There's a story. There's a story. It's simple, basic, that's it. But I think what we're saying about the modern, that monkey's not down out of the tree yet. He's still in the tree.
Yeah. Think back to Francie. Where did we leave Francie last week? The girl who left her sock on the floor. What?
Waiting for her father.
Waiting for her father, you know.
Apparently didn't know she existed.
Yeah, you know. And it's a story about things falling on you, blimps or otherwise, and how you cope with it. But there's possibility there, but there was no fond father-daughter embrace at the end of that story. And it's been an absurd world so far for her, you know. Has she finally come to an island of safety? Is the West Village in New York City a safe harbor? Let's see. The brown chest, Wendy, how did that end, do you recall?
Well, that one was hopeful.
Yeah, that was the generations going on with the pretty new daughter-in-law. Yeah.
I still thought that was up in the air. Signs are there that she's going to take that chest, but we're not told that she takes that chest. He suspends us there. We'll reach our conclusion with some evidence that she does take it, but we don't have textual evidence that she takes it, I think.
Howard, are you just stretching or you have an insight?
Remember Stitches? It's interesting. The father was on his way, and what's going to happen then? The girl worked her way through what happened to her, and it radically, our mind was changed from what we first heard to what we last heard. Where does she go with that from there? So it's another example of open-ended ending.
Yeah, she's got a father to deal with now. We've been told what happened with the mother, but we're left with the father, and that's not going to be the same sort of intercourse between parent and child as the first one. Yeah.
And that was I meant to make that parallel when I was doing the Eisenberg, that shared the plot of the movement from mother to father, you know, the two stories, the young women. And as Bert said, in either story do you know what's going to happen with the father. Yeah. Let's see. Lobster Night, we talked a lot about that, which Bert likes multiple endings. Remember, what were the possibilities? She was all, huh?
Lots of possibilities.
For the Lobster Night, yeah.
Because the two young men come in and she might have blown them away or blown herself away, or they might have found her dead.
Yeah, you just don't know, yeah.
He could screw us a happy ending, though. The guy needed to kill him.
Yeah.
You could say that in baboons.
Baboons, he's twirling through the air. Yeah. Or spinning's the word, was it not?
I think it's
Yeah. And of course, what about 1-900?
You can make that call again, can you?
Hung up. The phone's hung up. Remember, he's got where he calls the sex worker because he wants to talk to somebody. So, yeah.
Well, somehow we'll figure out a way to let you know if we ever hear from Antonia Nelson. But don't stay by your email machine. Maybe we'll hear something about that ending. Okay?
Non-writer, I don't want to be. However, after reading some of these, I'm going to start cutting out clips out of the newspaper, because these things are real. Yeah. I mean, so much does happen that is very strange. And you know, everyone's psyche's different. We've got, you know, family members that kind of, you know, and so I do think that we get, you see where they get their writing material.
Yeah, and you know, you probably know this from your own thinking, a little incident can send you off into something that's only tangentially related. Like, I don't know, I've not read whether Deborah Eisenberg began with the idea of the blimp that, you know, has fallen on, the pizza blimp that falls, that the crazy lady is thinking about. But it could be. And then from there, she constructed some kind of a story. You know, it's amazing the way the mind works, the imagination. Any other comments on anything we've read? Questions, insights?
Interesting choices.
Yeah, well, thank you. As I said, we tried to make it diverse. We maybe had too many marriage stories, but it came down to the ones that we thought were artistically interesting.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Well, thank you all very, very much. Very much.